Important events in a story. We're going to begin this lesson by reading a Japanese legend entitled Hofus the Stonecutter. Once upon a time in Japan, there was a poor stonecutter named Hofus, who used to go every day to the mountainside to cut great blocks of stone. He lived near the mountain in a little stone hut and worked hard and was happy. One day he took a load of stone to the house of a rich man. There he saw so many beautiful things that when he went back to his mountain he could think of nothing else. Then he began to wish that he too might sleep in a bed as soft as down, with curtains of silk and tassels of gold. He sighed, ah me, if Hofus only were rich as he. To his surprise, the voice of the mountain spirit answered, have thou thy wish. When Hofus returned home that evening, his little hut was gone, and in its place stood a great palace. It was filled with beautiful things, and best of all was a bed of down with curtains of silk and tassels of gold. Hofus decided to work no more, but he was not used to being idle, and time passed slowly. The days seemed very long. One day as he sat by the window he saw a carriage dash past. It was drawn by snow-white horses. In it sat a prince, while before and behind were servants in suits of blue and white. One was holding a golden umbrella over the prince. When the stonecutter saw this, he began to feel unhappy. He sighed, ah me, if Hofus only a prince might be. And again the same voice that he had heard on the mountain answered, be thou a prince. Straightway Hofus was a prince. He had servants dressed in crimson and gold, and he rode in a carriage with a golden umbrella over his head. For a short time he was happy, but one day, as he walked in the garden, he saw that the flowers were drooping, the grass was brown and dry, and when he rode out he felt the hot sun burn him in spite of his umbrella. The sun is mightier than I, thought he, and he sighed, ah me, Hofus, only the sun. And the voice answered, be thou the sun. Straightway the great sun he became. He burned the grass and rice fields. He dried up the streams. Rich and poor alike suffered from the terrible heat. One day a cloud came and rested in front of him, and hid the earth from his sight. He was angry and cried, ah me, if Hofus only a cloud might be. And the voice answered, be thou a cloud. Straightway a cloud he became. He floated before the face of the sun, and hid the earth from it. Then day after day the cloud dropped rain. The rivers overflowed, and the rice fields were covered with water. Towns were swept away. Only the great rocks on the mountainside stood unmoved midst the flood. The cloud looked at them in wonder and sighed, ah me, if Hofus only a rock might be. And the voice answered, be thou a rock. Straightway a rock he became. Proudly he stood. The sun could not burn him. The rain could not move him. Now at last, he said, no one is mightier than I. But one day he was waked from his dreams by a noise. Tap, 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 down at his feet. He looked, and there was a stonecutter driving his tool into the rock. Another blow, and the great rock shivered. A block of stone broke away. That man is mightier than I, cried Hofus, and he sighed. Ah me, if Hofus only the man might be. And the voice answered, be thou thyself. And straightway Hofus was himself again, a poor stonecutter, working all day upon the mountainside, and going home at night to his little hut. But he was content and happy, and never again did he wish to be other than Hofus the stonecutter. Now we're going to go back to the story and identify the main events using this sequence chart. First thing we need to do is put a topic in. For the topic, I'm going to put the title of our legend, Hofus the Stonecutter. Now, let's look back in the story and look for the first event. The first thing I did was go back to the beginning of my story and skim it over until I found the first thing exciting that happened, or the event. To me, that event was when Hofus wished that he were rich. So I highlighted in yellow the passage that started with ah me, and ended with silk and tassels of gold. Next, I went back to my sequence chart and looked underneath the topic where it says first. That's where I was going to write my first event. Now, I knew that I needed to write about when he wanted to be rich, but I didn't want to write what the story said exactly word for word because I knew I wouldn't remember it as well that way. So I reworded the event in my own words, and I came up with, the first event is when Hofus wishes to be wealthy, and the mountain spirit grants his wish. As a result, Hofus's hut is replaced by a palace that is filled with beautiful things. After I was finished writing down my first event, I went back to the story to look for the second event. I believe the second event is when Hofus wishes to become a prince. So, in pink, I highlighted the passage that began with, "When the stonecutter saw this, he began to feel unhappy," and finished highlighting after the sentence that ends with a golden umbrella over his head. After I finished highlighting my second event, I went back to my sequence chart, and in the second box beneath the topic box, I summarized what I believed to be the second event. I wrote, "Hofus gets bored and becomes unhappy, so he wishes to become a prince, and once again the mountain spirit grants his wish." Then, I once again returned to the story to look for the third event or exciting thing that happened in the story. That's how I'm defining event, is I'm identifying the events in this story by taking the parts that I remember the most, that were the most exciting. And that's how I know they were main events. So what I thought to be the third event was when Hofus wanted to be turned into the sun. So, in orange, I highlighted that section, which began with, "The sun is mightier than I," and ended with, "suffered from the terrible heat." I then once again returned to my sequence chart, and in the box underneath the one I had just written that says next, I summarized what I believed to be the third event in my own words. What I ended up writing was, the third event was when one day Hofus notices that the sun is killing the grass and the flowers. He gets upset because the sun is stronger than him, so he wishes to be the sun, and the mountain spirit once again grants his wish. Now when I went back to the story to look for my fourth event, I kind of already knew what I was looking for, because before I went right back to the story, I thought about what comes next in the story after Hofus wished to become the sun, and I knew he wanted to become a cloud. So I looked for the keyword cloud in the story, and when I came upon it, I highlighted it in green, and that was where my fourth event began, and I ended it with, "hid the earth from it." After I was finished highlighting, I went back to my sequence chart to write what I believed was the fourth event in my own words. Remember, I'm writing these events in my own words so that they're more important to me and so that I can remember them better. So, what I wrote for the fourth event was, eventually, a cloud came and sat in front of Hofus, blocking his view of the earth. Hofus becomes angry and wishes to become a cloud. The mountain spirit grants Hofus his wish, and in turn, he becomes a cloud. When it was time to look for the fifth event, I remembered that after Hofus was the cloud, he became the rock. So once again, I looked for the keyword in the passages of rock or rocks, and when I found it, I highlighted it in blue. The reason I'm highlighting all of the events in this story, and I'm highlighting them in different colors, is so that when or if I ever look back at this story, I know what the events were, and I know that the events were separate because they're in different colors. After highlighting the fifth event in the story, I went back to the sequence chart and wrote the fifth event in my own words. So what I wrote is, the cloud produces rain and eventually causes a flood. Everything but the rocks on the mountainside wash away. Hofus is amazed by the strength of the rocks, so he wishes to become a rock, and the mountain spirit grants his wish. When I went back to look for the sixth event in the story, I knew it was going to be my last event, because I remembered that after Hofus gets turned into the rock, he wishes to become himself again, and that's how the story ends. So, this time I went to the end of my story and skimmed upwards until I found the part where I thought Hofus began to realize that he wanted to be him again. So, I highlighted in purple on the sentence that started with, "He looked and there was a stone cutter," and stopped after the sentence that ends with, "at night to his little hut." Since I knew the sixth event was my last event, when I went back to my sequence chart, I knew I was going to write in the box that had the label of last. Now remember, I wrote my events in my own words so that they were more meaningful and so that I could easily remember them. So what I wrote for the final event was, Hofus wakes one morning to a stonecutter breaking a piece of him. Hofus realizes that man is the strongest creature, so he wishes to become a man. The mountain spirit grants his wish, and Hofus turns back into himself again. Now, Hofus lives happily ever after as a stonecutter.